The scent hit me first, pine and musk, raw amber and something feral beneath it all. A primal cocktail that made the fine hairs on my arms rise and my pulse quicken despite myself. I pressed my back against the cool concrete wall of the hospital corridor, willing myself to become invisible as the executive board members filed past in their crisp white coats, their confident alpha strides eating up the distance. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the world outside into a gray watercolor blur. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, same as the emergency board meeting that had summoned all the senior medical staff. Same as the knot of dread that had settled in my stomach when Dr. Mercer announced that Northridge Hospital was merging with Stone River Medical Group, and the notorious Dr. Gabriel Stone would be conducting personnel evaluations himself. "Keep your head down, Ellie," my mother's voice whispered in my memory. The delicate silver locket she'd given me on her deathbed felt suddenly heavy against my collarbone. Inside was a pressed forget-me-not, her favorite flower, the last thing she'd touched before the cancer took her. The world isn't kind to Omegas who draw attention, especially not ones like us, without a pack to protect them. I'd followed that advice for 28 years. Through medical school, through my residency, through earning my position as one of the only Omega pediatric surgeons in the state, I'd become an expert at blending into backgrounds, at suppressing my scent with clinical-grade blockers, at being exceptional without being noticed. But today my blockers were failing me. The stress of the merger, the double shift I'd pulled in the pediatric ICU, the approaching heat I could feel simmering beneath my skin, all of it was breaking through my carefully constructed chemical walls. "Dr. Eleanor Wright?" The voice cut through the hallway chatter like a scalpel through skin, deep, commanding, with a slight rasp that seemed to vibrate along my spine. I looked up, already knowing who I would see, already feeling the weight of his gaze before our eyes met. "Doctor." Gabriel Stone stood at the end of the corridor, impossibly tall in his tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders blocking the fluorescent light behind him like an eclipse. His dark hair was swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and authority. High cheekbones, strong jaw darkened with precisely trimmed stubble, and eyes the color of a winter storm. Cold, assessing, hungry. The conversations around us dimmed as nurses and doctors alike sensed the sudden shift in atmosphere. An alpha of his standing commanded attention without trying, but this was something else, something electric and dangerous that pulsed between us as he strode toward me, his gaze never wavering. I straightened my spine, clutching my patient charts tighter against my chest, a shield that suddenly felt paper-thin. "Dr. Stone," I managed, proud that my voice remained steady despite the tremor in my hands. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. A smile ghosted across his lips, not reaching his eyes. "We don't, not yet, but I make it a point to know everyone under my authority." He emphasized the last word, a subtle reminder of the new hierarchy. "Especially when they're as uniquely positioned as you are." Heat flooded my cheeks. He knew. Of course he knew. An alpha like him could probably scent me from across the building, blockers or not. "I've been reviewing your cases," he continued, moving closer. Too close. Close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that his scent enveloped me completely. "Impressive survival rates, innovative techniques. You've saved children that other surgeons would have declared hopeless." The unexpected praise caught me off guard. "I just do what needs to be done." Modest, too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell me, Doctor. Right, why are you hiding in the pediatric wing of a second-rate hospital when you could be revolutionizing surgical techniques at any top medical center in the country?" The question stung, mostly because I'd asked it of myself on countless lonely nights. "These children need me. They don't have anyone else." Something flickered in his expression then. Recognition, perhaps. Or judgment. "No pack connections to leverage? No alpha to smooth your path?" I stiffened, anger briefly overriding my instinctual fear. "I've earned everything I have through my own merit, Dr. Stone. Not all of us need to rely on biological advantages or social connections." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Challenging an alpha in his position was professional suicide. But instead of the cold fury I expected, a genuine smile curved his lips, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastating, fascinating. he murmured, and I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or truly intrigued. I look forward to our official evaluation, Dr. Wright. I have a feeling there's much more to you than meets the eye. He leaned in, so slightly that anyone watching might not have noticed, but close enough that his breath brushed my ear when he spoke again, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to resonate in my very core. Your blockers are failing, by the way. I'd suggest a fresh application before your rounds. Unless... His nostrils flared slightly. Unless you want every alpha in this hospital following you around like lovesick puppies. Though I assure you, his gaze hardened, something possessive and primal flashing behind his eyes. I don't share well with others. Before I could respond, he was gone, continuing down the corridor with the rest of the board members who had paused to wait for him. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. That night, I dreamed of storms and silver eyes, and hands that branded my skin with heat. The next week passed in a blur of surgeries and paperwork, of dodging Dr. Stone in hallways and pretending not to feel his gaze burning into me whenever our paths crossed. I doubled my blocker dosage, ignored the concerned looks from the nurses when I worked 18-hour shifts, and tried to lose myself in the work that had always been my sanctuary. But on Friday afternoon, as I was preparing to leave after successfully repairing a complex congenital heart defect in a 3-month-old, my pager buzzed with a message that made my stomach drop. My office. 5 p.m. No excuses. GS. I considered ignoring it, claiming an emergency surgery or simply leaving the hospital, but I knew better. Gabriel Stone was not a man who made requests that could be denied. And with the merger evaluation still ongoing, my job, and by extension, my young patient's care, hung in the balance. At exactly 5 p.m., I knocked on the heavy oak door of what had once been the chief of surgery's office and was now emblazoned with Gabriel Stone's name in gleaming silver letters. "Enter," came the command from within. The office had been transformed since I'd last seen it. Gone were the dusty medical texts and faded family photos of the previous chief. In their place were sleek, minimalist furniture, state-of-the-art technology, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the storm still raging outside. Lightning flashed across the darkening sky, briefly illuminating Gabriel as he stood looking out at the tempest, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when I entered, but I knew he was aware of every movement as I closed the door behind me. "You requested to see me, Dr. Stone." "Gabriel," he corrected, finally turning to face me. He'd removed his suit jacket, and the crisp white shirt he wore was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing powerful forearms marked with an intricate tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric. "We're going to be working closely together. I think we can dispense with formalities." Something in his tone made my pulse jump. "I prefer to maintain professional boundaries." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Of course you do." He moved to his desk, picking up a file I recognized as my personnel record. "Tell me, Eleanor." "Ellie," I corrected automatically, then bit my lip. His smile widened. "Ellie," he repeated, my name in his mouth sounding like something intimate, something sacred. "Tell me why you've turned down 3 research grants and a position at Mayo in the past 2 years." I blinked, surprised he'd uncovered information not in my official record. "I told you. My patients need me here." "Noble," he commented, setting the file down and moving closer. "But I wonder if that's the whole truth." I forced myself to hold my ground as he circled me slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. My heart thundered in my chest, and I prayed he couldn't hear it. "Or perhaps," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "you're afraid. Afraid of standing out. Afraid of what happens when an Omega without a pack tries to claim space in a world dominated by alphas." My mother's locket seemed to burn against my skin. "Keep your head down, Ellie. My secondary gender has nothing to do with my career choices," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. Gabriel stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "Doesn't it? The world isn't fair, Ellie. We both know that. But you've been hiding your light for so long you've forgotten how brightly you could shine." Something in his words, in the intensity of his gaze, made my carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. No one had ever seen through me so completely, had recognized the ambition I'd buried beneath layers of practicality and fear. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Lightning flashed again, casting half his face in shadow. "I want you to lead my new pediatric cardiac research department." The offer was so unexpected I took a step back. "What?" "You heard me." He moved to his desk, pulling out blueprints and spreading them across the surface. "Stone River is building a new children's hospital wing. State-of-the-art facilities, unlimited research budget, the best surgical team money can buy. And I want you to run it." I approached cautiously, looking down at the plans that showed a facility beyond anything I dared to dream of. A place where I could truly make a difference. Save children who might otherwise be lost. "Why me?" I asked, suspicion warring with hope. Gabriel's expression softened fractionally. "Because you're the best. Because those children deserve the best. And because—" He hesitated, something vulnerable briefly crossing his face before his mask of control returned. "Because I know what it's like to fight twice as hard for half the recognition." I looked up sharply, studying him. Gabriel Stone, with his perfect pedigree, his wealth and power and undeniable alpha status, claiming to understand struggle, it seemed impossible. As if reading my thoughts, he unbuttoned his left cuff and rolled the sleeve higher, revealing the full extent of the tattoo I'd glimpsed earlier. It wasn't decorative as I'd assumed, but an intricate pattern of scars meticulously covered by ink. "Burn scars. We all have our stories, Ellie," he said quietly. "Some of us just hide them better than others." Before I could respond, a crack of thunder shook the building, and the lights flickered once, twice, before plunging us into darkness. I gasped, momentarily disoriented. Then I felt it, the warmth of his hand finding mine in the dark. Steady and sure. "Don't move," he said, his voice closer than I expected. "The emergency generators will kick in soon." But they didn't. And as we stood there in the darkness, his hand holding mine, I became acutely aware of how the air between us had changed, charged with something that had nothing to do with the storm outside and everything to do with the storm brewing within me. My blockers were failing again. I could feel it in the sudden sensitivity of my skin, in the warmth pooling low in my abdomen. And judging by the sudden tension in Gabriel's grip, the subtle change in his breathing, he could sense it too. "Ellie," he whispered, my name a warning and a question. The darkness made me brave, or perhaps it was simply that for the first time in my life, someone was offering me everything I'd secretly wanted: recognition, opportunity, and something else. Something primal and forbidden that I'd denied myself for too long. I stepped closer, guided by his scent, by the heat radiating from his body. "Yes," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was agreeing to. His free hand found my waist, scorching through the thin fabric of my scrubs. "If you don't walk away right now," he growled, his control audibly slipping. "I can't promise I'll be able to stop." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his face, his eyes dark with desire, his expression caught between hunger and restraint. Then darkness again, and the thunder that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew about myself. I didn't walk away. The emergency lights flickered on after what could have been minutes or hours, dim, blood-red beacons that cast more shadows than they dispelled. In their crimson glow, Gabriel's face was transformed into something almost otherworldly, his features sharpened, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself moving closer, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. "You should know," he said, his voice rough with restraint, "that I don't do temporary, not with work, not with anything else." His hands tightened on my waist, "especially not with someone like you." "Someone like me?" I echoed, my voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. Gabriel's thumb traced a slow, deliberate circle against my hip. "Someone rare. Someone who challenges me. Someone who makes me want things I'd convinced myself I could live without." The raw honesty in his voice pierced through the haze of hormones and attraction. This wasn't just alpha instinct responding to an unbonded omega. This was something deeper, something that frightened me far more than mere physical desire. I pressed my palm against his chest, feeling the thunderous beating of his heart. We barely know each other, don't we? His smile was slow, dangerous. I've read every paper you've published, watched recordings of your surgeries, spoken to every colleague who's ever worked with you. His hand moved from my waist to cut my face, his touch unexpectedly gentle. I know you better than you think, Dr. Eleanor Wright. Brilliant surgeon, fiercely independent, deeply compassionate, terrified of needing anyone. His accuracy stole my breath, and I don't know you at all. Then ask me. His thumb brushed my lower lip. Anything you want to know. 1,000 questions crowded my mind, but only one made it past my lips. The scars. What happened? Something dark flickered behind his eyes. For a moment, I thought he would pull away, rebuild the walls I'd glimpsed beyond. Instead, he guided my hand to his arm, let my fingers trace the raised patterns beneath the intricate tattoo. When I was 8, my father decided I wasn't alpha enough, he said, his tone clinically detached, though his pulse jumped beneath my fingertips. He believed pain was instructive, fire particularly so. Horror washed through me. Your own father did this to you? Victor Stone didn't believe in half measures, or weakness. The bitterness in his voice was ancient, calcified. I was his only son, his legacy. He was determined to burn away anything in me that didn't meet his standards. My medical training cataloged the patterns beneath my fingers, deliberate, systematic burns that would have caused excruciating pain to a child. My omega instincts howled with protective fury. Where is he now? I whispered. Dead. Gabriel's smile was cold. Heart failure, 7 years ago. Poetic, considering his claim that I never had the heart to be a true alpha. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and unvarnished. I understood then what he'd meant earlier, about fighting twice as hard for half the recognition. Gabriel Stone hadn't been handed his empire. He'd built it from the ashes of childhood trauma, proving his worth to a ghost who would never acknowledge it. Just as I'd spent my life proving myself to a world that saw omegas as inherently less. I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate but sincere. Don't be. His expression softened. It made me who I am, and it taught me to recognize others who've been forged by adversity rather than broken by it. His eyes held mine. People like you. Before I could respond, a sharp knock rattled the door. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers, as the overhead lights flickered back to life, harsh fluorescence dispelling the intimate shadows. Dr. Stone? A security guard's voice called through the door. Generators back online. Hospital administrator asked me to check all offices. Gabriel straightened his shirt, composure returning with impressive speed. All fine here, he called back, his voice steady. To me, he murmured, this conversation isn't over. The moment shattered. Reality crashed back. What was I doing? I'd spent my entire career avoiding exactly this kind of complication. An alpha in a position of power over me was the most dangerous entanglement possible, especially one as dominant and intense as Gabriel Stone. I should go, I said, backing toward the door. Night shift will be short-staffed with the storm. Gabriel didn't try to stop me, but his eyes promised this was merely a postponement, not an ending. Think about my offer, Ellie, the research position. It's yours regardless of, he gestured between us, this. I nodded jerkily and fled, trying to ignore how my body ached at the separation, how the rational part of my brain was being systematically dismantled by instincts I'd suppressed for years. 3 days later, I stood in a silent operating room, staring down at the tiny body on my table. 7-month-old Lily Chen, born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, essentially half a heart, had been my patient since birth. She'd survived 2 of the 3 surgeries needed to reroute her blood flow, beating every odds I'd given her parents. Today should have been routine, a simple check to ensure her shunt was functioning properly before her final surgery next month. Instead, I was looking at catastrophic failure, her little body turning blue before my eyes as her oxygen levels plummeted. BP's dropping, the anesthesiologist warned, 60/30 and falling. Push another round of epi, I ordered, my hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. And get me the bypass cart. We're going to have to open her up now. The scrub nurse's eyes widened above her mask. Dr. Wright, should we call for... There's no time. I cut her off. If we don't establish bypass in the next 3 minutes, we lose her. Move. What followed was the most intense 47 minutes of my career. Twice, Lily's heart stopped. Twice, I refused to give up, massaging her walnut-sized organ with my fingertips until it fluttered back to life. I reconstructed her shunt using a grafting technique I'd been developing, but had never attempted on a patient so young, so fragile. By the time I closed her chest, my scrubs were soaked with sweat, my legs trembling from standing in the same position for hours. But Lily's color had returned, her vital signs stabilizing with each passing minute. That was... The head surgical nurse shook her head as we scrubbed out. I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Wright. I managed a tired smile, the adrenaline crash leaving me lightheaded. Lily did all the hard work. That little girl's a fighter. So are you. The nurse squeezed my shoulder. You should rest. You look dead on your feet. I nodded. Though I knew rest would have to wait. Lily's parents were waiting for news, and then there were post-op orders to write, and the inevitable incident report explaining why I'd performed emergency open-heart surgery without waiting for the cardiothoracic attending on call. But when I pushed through the OR doors, it wasn't just Lily's anxious parents waiting in the corridor. Gabriel stood with them, his imposing presence somehow comforting, rather than intimidating, as he spoke quietly to the frightened couple. When he saw me, something like relief flashed across his face before his professional mask returned. I addressed Lily's parents first, explaining what had happened, and assuring them that while the situation had been serious, their daughter was stable and being moved to recovery. Mrs. Chen broke down in tears, clutching my hands in hers. You saved her. Again. How can we ever thank you? Just take care of that beautiful girl, I said, blinking back my own tears. She's special. After they left to wait outside the recovery room, I turned to Gabriel, suddenly conscious of my disheveled appearance. The dark circles I knew shadowed my eyes after 3 nights of minimal sleep. How did you know? I asked. I was reviewing surgical schedules when the emergency alert came through the system. He studied me, his gaze clinical but concerned. The technique you used? That was your experimental grafting procedure, wasn't it? The one journals rejected as too risky? I stiffened, preparing for criticism. It was her only chance. To my surprise, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features. It was brilliant. You just proved every one of those short-sighted reviewers wrong. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This is exactly why I want you heading research. You see possibilities where others see only protocols. The unexpected praise, coming on the heels of intense stress and exhaustion, hit me like a physical blow. My vision swam, the corridor tilting around me. Gabriel's hand shot out, steadying me. When did you last sleep? Or eat, for that matter? I tried to remember. I had coffee this morning, I think. He muttered something that sounded suspiciously like a curse. That's it. I'm taking you home. I'm fine, I protested, even as my body betrayed me, swaying into his support. I need to monitor Lily's post-op progress. Dr. Patel can handle the recovery, Gabriel said, his tone brooking no argument. You're no good to your patients if you collapse from exhaustion. I wanted to argue further, but the world was growing fuzzy at the edges, my body finally registering the toll of the emergency surgery and days of minimal rest. Before I could formulate a coherent objection, Gabriel had guided me to the doctor's lounge, retrieved my bag from my locker, and draped his own coat over my shoulders. The rich scent of him enveloped me, making my overtaxed brain even foggier. By the time we reached the parking garage, I was leaning heavily against him, too tired to maintain my usual careful distance. Keys, he prompted gently. I fumbled in my bag, eventually producing my house keys. I can drive myself. Gabriel's eyebrow rose. You can barely stand upright. I'm driving you home, and that's not negotiable. Too exhausted to argue, I let him help me into the passenger seat of his sleek black Audi, the leather seats impossibly soft against my aching body. I must have dozed off immediately, because the next thing I knew, we were pulling up outside my small bungalow on the outskirts of town. How did you know where I live? I mumbled, still half asleep. A shadow of something, guilt perhaps, crossed his face. Your personnel file, he admitted. I wanted to be prepared for any emergency. I should have been disturbed by this invasion of privacy. but in my exhausted state, I found it oddly touching that he'd taken such care. He helped me from the car, supporting me up the short path to my front door when my legs threatened to give out. Inside, my home looked smaller than usual, Gabriel's commanding presence filling the modest space. He guided me to my couch, disappearing into my kitchen, and returning moments later with a glass of water and 2 painkillers. "For the headache I'm sure you have," he explained, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. I took them gratefully, suddenly aware of the throbbing behind my eyes. "Thank you. You don't have to stay. I'll be fine after some sleep." Gabriel ignored this, moving around my living room with surprising domesticity, adjusting the thermostat and drawing the curtains against the late afternoon sun. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" I shrugged, unable to remember. He shook his head, disapproval warring with concern. "I'm ordering food. Then you're going to sleep for at least 8 hours. "So bossy," I murmured, my eyelids growing heavier by the second. His soft laugh was the last thing I remembered before exhaustion claimed me completely. When I woke, the house was dark except for the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. A blanket had been tucked around me, and the scent of something delicious lingered in the air. I blinked, disoriented, before remembering how I'd gotten home. "Gabriel?" I called softly, unsure if he'd left while I slept. "Here." He appeared in the doorway to my kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. The domestic image was so at odds with his usual commanding presence that I wondered if I was still dreaming. "You cooked?" I asked incredulously, sitting up and wincing as my stiff muscles protested. "Don't sound so surprised. I do have some domestic skills." He approached, kneeling beside the couch to examine me with clinical precision. "Colors better." "How's the headache?" "Gone," I admitted, suddenly acutely aware of our proximity, of the fact that we were alone in my home, with no hospital protocols or professional boundaries to hide behind. The realization sent a flush of heat across my skin. Gabriel noticed. Of course he did, his nostrils flaring slightly as he caught the subtle change in my scent. His eyes darkened, but he maintained his distance. "You should eat," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Then I'll go." But neither of us moved. In the soft lamplight, the barriers we'd constructed seemed flimsy, transparent. I could see the concern in his eyes, the way it mingled with desire and something deeper, something that made my heart race with equal parts fear and anticipation. "What if I don't want you to go?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us. Gabriel went very still. "Ellie," he said, my name a warning and a prayer. "You're exhausted. Vulnerable." "I won't take advantage of that. I'm a grown woman," I countered, finding strength in his restraint, capable of making my own decisions. "Are you?" His gaze was searching, intense. "Or are you letting exhaustion and biology make them for you?" The question stung, because there was truth in it. My heat was approaching. I could feel it in the sensitivity of my skin, the restlessness in my bones, and Gabriel was right. I was vulnerable after the emotional and physical drain of saving Lily's life. But there was something else, something beyond biology or circumstance, that had been building between us since that first charged encounter in the hospital corridor. I reached out, my fingers brushing the strong line of his jaw. Maybe for once in my life I'm tired of fighting what I want. His control visibly frayed, a muscle jumping in his jaw as he leaned into my touch. "And what is it you want, Ellie?" The question hung between us, laden with possibilities and consequences. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the sky. "You," I whispered, the single syllable carrying the weight of years of denial, of carefully constructed walls now crumbling beneath the force of something I didn't want to, resist any longer. "I want you, Gabriel." Lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp planes of his face, the hunger in his eyes as he processed my admission. For one breathless moment, he remained perfectly still, as if giving me one last chance to retract my words, to retreat behind the safety of professional distance. When I didn't, Something primal and possessive transformed his expression. He moved with alpha speed, cupping my face between his hands with surprising gentleness, even as his eyes blazed with barely leashed control. "If we start this," he said, his voice a low growl that reverberated through my bones, "there's no going back. I need you to understand that. I'm not built for casual, Ellie. Not with you." The intensity in his words should have frightened me. I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, this surrender of control. But as the storm raged outside, mirroring the one building within me, I realized I was tired of fighting. Against my nature, against my desires, against the connection that had sparked between us from that first electric moment. "I understand," I said, and I did. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't casual. It wasn't simple. It was transformative and terrifying and perhaps inevitable. His thumbs traced the curve of my cheekbones, his touch reverent. "Are you sure? Because once I taste you, I won't be able to stop." In answer, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his. The effect was instantaneous, as if I'd struck a match in a room filled with gasoline. Gabriel's restraint shattered, his arms encircling me with possessive strength as he deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in my hair to tilt my head back, exposing my throat to his exploring lips. The scrape of his stubble against my sensitive skin sent shockwaves of pleasure through my system, drawing a soft gasp from my lips. "Your scent," he murmured against my neck, inhaling deeply. "Do you have any idea what it does to me? How hard it's been to keep my distance when every instinct I have is screaming to claim you." His words sent liquid heat pooling low in my abdomen, my body responding to his presence, his touch, his scent, in ways that transcended conscious thought. This was biology, yes, alpha and omega, predator and prey. But it was also something more complex, a recognition of kindred spirits who had fought their way through different but equally challenging circumstances. "Then stop fighting," I whispered, my fingers working at the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against mine. "Stop holding back." A growl rumbled through his chest, vibrating against my palms as I pushed the fabric from his shoulders, revealing the full expanse of his torso, powerful and marked with scars that told a story of survival, of endurance. I traced them with trembling fingers, mapping the history written on his skin. "Beautiful," I breathed, pressing my lips to a particularly vicious mark that curved around his ribs. Gabriel's breath hitched, his hands fisting in my hair. "No one's ever called them that before." "Then no one's ever really seen you." I continued my exploration, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath my palm. With a sound that was half groan, half snarl, Gabriel swept me into his arms, carrying me through the darkened house to my bedroom as if I weighed nothing. He laid me on the bed with unexpected tenderness, his powerful body hovering over mine as lightning illuminated the room in sporadic flashes. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining control. In response, I pulled him down to me, our bodies aligning in a way that felt like coming home, like finding a missing piece I hadn't known was absent. His weight pressed me into the mattress, solid and secure, as his mouth claimed mine once more. The kiss deeper now, hungrier, edged with a desperation that matched my own. Clothes were discarded, hands explored newly revealed skin. And when he finally entered me, the sensation was so overwhelming that tears sprang to my eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer intensity of the connection, the feeling of completeness that washed over me in waves. Gabriel froze, concern replacing desire. "Did I hurt you?" I shook my head, unable to speak, pulling him closer instead, urging him to move. He did, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, as our bodies found their rhythm, ancient and new all at once. Outside, thunder crashed as if the sky itself was responding to the primal energy building between us. "Mine," Gabriel growled, his control slipping as his movements became more forceful, more demanding. "Say it, Ellie. Say you're mine." The old independent part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain some semblance of the walls I'd built. But in that moment, With pleasure spiraling through me, with his scent enveloping me and his body claiming mine, truth was the only option. Yours, I gasped, the admission tearing from my throat as the first waves of climax washed over me. I'm yours, Gabriel. His responding growl was pure alpha satisfaction as he followed me over the edge, our bodies locked together in the most primal of connections. Afterward, as rain continued to drum against the windows and distant thunder rumbled across the sky, Gabriel held me close, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my bare shoulder. I should have felt vulnerable, exposed. Instead, I felt strangely protected, as if his arms were a fortress against the world that had often been unkind to us both. What happens now? I asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Gabriel's arms tightened around me. Now you accept my offer to lead the pediatric cardiac research department, and we see where this goes. His voice was lighter than I'd ever heard it, almost playful. Though I warn you, I already know where I want it to go. I propped myself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. The hard edges had softened, the perpetual furrow between his brows smoothed away. He looked younger, almost carefree. And where's that? I asked, trying to match his tone despite the sudden flutter of anxiety in my chest. His expression grew serious again, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. I've spent my life building an empire, Ellie. A legacy to prove my father wrong. But what's the point of all of it if there's no one to share it with? No one who sees past the power and position to the man beneath? My heart stuttered at the implication. Gabriel, we barely know each other. Don't we? His smile was gentle, his thumb brushing my lower lip. I know you risk your career to save children others have given up on. I know you work until you're on the verge of collapse rather than let down a patient. I know you've built walls to protect yourself from a world that hasn't always been kind to you. His gaze held mine, unflinching. And you know me better than anyone has in a very long time. There was truth in his words, an undeniable recognition that transcended the short time we'd known each other. Still, caution made me hesitate. What about the hospital? The merger? If we're together and I take the research position, people will talk. Gabriel's laugh was low and without humor. People always talk, Ellie. The question is whether we let their opinions dictate our choices. His expression sobered. But if you're concerned about professional perception, we can keep this private until the merger is complete. I won't pressure you. The consideration touched me deeply. An alpha of his standing could have simply demanded what he wanted, used his position to force my compliance. Instead, he was offering me choice, respect, partnership. I need time, I said finally, to think. To be sure this isn't just biology, he supplied when I trailed off. Heat hormones and alpha pheromones? I nodded, relieved he understood. Take all the time you need. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. I'm not going anywhere. But time, it seemed, was not on our side. 2 weeks later, I stood in the hospital bathroom, staring at the plastic stick in my hand with disbelief that bordered on shock. 2 pink lines, clear and undeniable. Pregnant. It was impossible. I was on suppressants. We'd used protection. But as my mind raced through the events of that night, and the several passionate encounters that had followed, I remembered the storm, the power outage that had affected the hospital's refrigeration systems. My medication, stored in the staff refrigerator during my long shifts, could have been compromised. And Gabriel was an alpha in his prime, his fertility likely enhanced by the intense connection between us. I sank onto the closed toilet lid, trembling as the implications crashed over me. A baby. Gabriel's baby. Our baby. The thought sent equal waves of terror and wonder through me. I'd never planned on children. My career had always been my priority, and the risks of pregnancy for an unbonded Omega were considerable. But now, faced with the reality growing inside me, I realized a part of me wanted this child with a fierceness that took my breath away. The question was, would Gabriel want it too? We'd grown closer over the past fortnight, spending nights at my house or his penthouse, sharing meals and conversations that ranged from medical innovations to childhood memories. I'd begun to see beneath the hard exterior he presented to the world, to understand the depths of compassion and integrity that guided his actions despite his ruthless reputation. But we hadn't discussed children, hadn't defined what our relationship was becoming. And now this pregnancy would force the issue, accelerating whatever was building between us before it had time to develop naturally. My pager buzzed, jolting me from my spiraling thoughts. Emergency in the PICU, one of my post-op patients. Shoving the pregnancy test deep into my lab coat pocket, I pushed my personal crisis aside, focusing on the immediate need. That was what I'd always done. Compartmentalized, prioritized, survived. The emergency turned out to be 7-year-old Marco, who developed a dangerous arrhythmia following his valve replacement 3 days earlier. For the next 4 hours, I worked alongside the cardiac team to stabilize him, my own condition momentarily forgotten in the intensity of saving a life. By the time Marco was stable, night had fallen. Exhausted, I headed for the doctor's lounge, intending to grab my bag and go home to process the life-changing news in private. Instead, I found Gabriel waiting, his tall frame silhouetted against the windows. "I heard about Marco," he said, turning as I entered. "Good work." "Thank you." I hovered near the door, suddenly hyper-aware of the test still in my pocket, of the secret growing inside me. "What are you doing here so late?" "Waiting for you." He approached slowly, studying my face with a frown. "What's wrong?" "You're pale." I tried to smile, to deflect. "Just tired." "It's been a long day." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. He knew me too well already, could read the tension in my shoulders, the slight tremor in my hands. "Ellie," he said softly, "whatever it is, you can tell me." The compassion in his voice nearly undid me. Tears pricked behind my eyes, and I blinked rapidly to hold them back. This wasn't how I'd imagined sharing such news. Exhausted in a hospital lounge, with no time to prepare or gauge his potential reaction. But perhaps there was no right way, no perfect moment for something that would alter both our lives so completely. With shaking fingers, I reached into my pocket and withdrew the test, holding it out to him wordlessly. Gabriel took it, his expression blank with incomprehension for a moment before understanding dawned. His eyes widened, darting from the test to my face and back again. "You're pregnant," he said, his voice strangely flat. I nodded, unable to read his reaction. Fear coiling in my stomach. "I know it's unexpected. I know we never discussed—" "Mine?" he interrupted, his tone suddenly harsh. The question stung like a slap. "Of course it's yours," I snapped, hurt overriding anxiety. "Who else's would it be?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, a primal possessiveness that made the air between us crackle with tension. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides, one hand coming to rest on my still flat abdomen, while the other tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. "My child," he said, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to vibrate through my bones. "Our child." I searched his face, trying to discern if the intensity in his expression was anger, shock, or something else entirely. "I don't expect anything from you," I said quickly. "This doesn't have to change your plans or—" "Doesn't have to change?" He broke off with a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "Ellie, do you have any idea what this means to me?" Before I could respond, the lounge door swung open. Dr. Mercer, the hospital administrator, paused in the doorway, taking in our intimate position with raised eyebrows. "Dr. Stone, Dr. Wright," he said, his tone carefully neutral, though his disapproval was evident. I didn't mean to interrupt. Gabriel didn't move away, his hand remaining possessively on my abdomen. "You're not interrupting anything, James. In fact, your timing is perfect. I was just about to inform Dr. Wright that her appointment as head of the new Pediatric Cardiac Research Department has been approved by the board." Dr. Mercer's lips thinned. "I see. And would this appointment have anything to do with your personal relationship?" I stiffened, humiliation washing over me. This was exactly what I'd feared. My professional accomplishments overshadowed by assumptions about how I'd earned them. But before I could defend myself, Gabriel's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Dr. Wright's appointment is based solely on her exceptional qualifications and innovative techniques, which have saved countless children other surgeons declared hopeless." His voice was deceptively soft, but laced with unmistakable warning. I would advise against suggesting otherwise, James. It might lead people to question your own qualifications for continuing in your position. The threat hung in the air, naked and effective. Dr. Mercer paled, nodding jerkily before backing out of the room, the door swinging shut behind him. As soon as we were alone, I pulled away from Gabriel's touch. You shouldn't have done that. What? Defended you? Defended us? Frustration edged his voice. Threatened his job. I ran a hand through my hair, anxiety bubbling up again. Don't you see? This is exactly why relationships between alphas and omegas in the workplace are discouraged. The power imbalance, the perception of favoritism. To hell with perception, Gabriel growled, closing the distance between us again. You earned that position through your own merit. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me. That's not the point, I exploded, weeks of tension finally breaking through my careful control. I've spent my entire career proving myself, fighting against the stereotype that omegas succeed through manipulation rather than merit. And now, I gestured helplessly between us, then at my stomach. Now I'm pregnant by the hospital's new owner, and every achievement I've ever earned will be questioned. Gabriel's expression softened, understanding replacing frustration. Ellie, he said gently, your work speaks for itself. The lives you've saved, the innovations you've pioneered. No one can take those away from you. You don't understand, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. You've never had to prove your right to exist in spaces not designed for you. Something vulnerable flashed across his face. Haven't I? He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the scars once again. My father made it very clear that I wasn't the alpha he wanted me to be. That I wasn't worthy of the stone name or legacy. Every accomplishment, every acquisition, every success has been a battle to prove him wrong. The raw honesty in his voice pierced through my fear. We were more alike than different, both shaped by the expectations others had placed upon us, both fighting to define ourselves on our own terms. I'm scared, Gabriel, I admitted, the words barely audible, of what this pregnancy means, of how it changes things between us, of losing everything I've worked for. His hands came up to frame my face, his touch infinitely gentle despite the strength I knew they contained. You won't lose anything, Ellie. Not your career, not your independence, not your identity. His thumbs brushed away my tears. But you might gain something you never knew you wanted. A family? I whispered. His smile was soft, transforming his usually severe features. A pack, he corrected. You, me, our child, and any others who come after. Others. The thought of multiple children, of a home filled with laughter and chaos and love, sent an unexpected yearning through me. A life so different from my solitary existence, from the empty house I returned to after long hospital shifts. You want this, I realized, studying his face. You want this baby, more than I've ever wanted anything, he admitted, an unfamiliar vulnerability in his voice. My whole life, I've built things. Buildings, companies, a reputation. But nothing I've created will outlast me like our child will. His hand returned to my abdomen, reverent. This is a legacy worth building. His certainty was like a lifeline in the storm of my emotions, but one fear remained, pulsing beneath the surface. And us? What happens to us? Gabriel's expression intensified, something ancient and possessive darkening his gaze. You can't escape my baby, Omega. He growled, the alpha timbre in his voice sending shivers down my spine. Or me. The declaration should have frightened me, should have triggered every independence instinct I'd cultivated over the years. Instead, it settled something restless within me, a recognition that what was building between us transcended conventional relationships. Outside, a new storm was gathering, lightning illuminating the darkness beyond the windows. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing the tempest alone. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of changes. My body transformed, the gentle swell of my abdomen growing more pronounced each day. The new pediatric cardiac research department took shape under my direction, its state-of-the-art facilities exceeding even Gabriel's ambitious promises. And our relationship evolved, deepening into something I'd never imagined possible for someone as fiercely independent as myself. But not all changes were welcome. The whispers started almost immediately after Dr. Mercer witnessed our confrontation in the doctor's lounge. By the time my pregnancy became visible, they had evolved into outright speculation, spreading through hospital corridors like a virulent infection. Sleeping her way to the top, Alpha's knocked up Omega. Wonder how long before he tires of her and moves on. I pretended not to hear, keeping my head high and my focus on my work. But each barbed comment found its mark, reopening wounds I'd thought long healed. Gabriel, when he learned of the gossip, wanted to confront each source directly, his protective alpha instincts in overdrive. It took all my persuasion to convince him that such actions would only validate the rumors, casting me further as the helpless Omega in need of her alpha's defense. Let my work speak for itself, I insisted one evening as we sat in his penthouse. The city lights spread beneath us like a carpet of stars. The results of our first clinical trial will silence them more effectively than any threat you could make. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm against the arm of his chair. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone. Welcome to my world, I said, my tone lighter than I felt. I've been proving myself since medical school. He rose, coming to kneel before my chair, his hands cradling the swell of our child. At 26 weeks, the baby was active, often kicking forcefully enough for Gabriel to feel. As if on cue, a strong movement rippled beneath his palm. She's strong, he murmured, his expression softening in a way it only did when addressing our unborn child. Like her mother. We'd learned 3 weeks earlier that we were having a daughter. The technician had barely finished announcing the news before Gabriel began making plans, a nursery with views of the city, the best schools, trust funds, and security details. It had taken considerable effort to temper his enthusiasm, to remind him that our daughter deserved a childhood focused on love and growth rather than advantage and achievement. I want her to have everything I didn't, he'd explained, vulnerability evident in his voice. Safety. Stability. The certainty that she's cherished exactly as she is. How could I argue with such raw honesty? Instead, I'd guided his hand to my belly, letting our daughter's movements bridge the gap between his wounded past and the future we were building. Now, as another kick pressed against his palm, Gabriel smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his severe features. I never thought I could love someone I haven't even met yet. The simple admission unlocked something in my chest, a warmth that spread through me like sunshine after endless winter. I know, I whispered, covering his hand with mine. It's terrifying, isn't it? How completely they own you before they even take their first breath. Gabriel looked up, his gray eyes intent. Is that how you feel about me too? Terrified by how much you care? The question caught me off guard, its directness piercing through the careful boundaries I still maintained around parts of my heart. Even after months together, after sharing my body and my bed, and now carrying his child, I held something back, a final fortress of independence that even he hadn't breached. Sometimes, I admitted, the honesty costing me more than I'd expected. I spent so long being self-sufficient, Gabriel. Learning to need someone else doesn't come naturally. Rather than appearing hurt by my confession, he nodded, understanding in his gaze. We're alike that way. His thumb traced circles on my abdomen, his touch grounding me. But I think there's strength in allowing yourself to need someone, in trusting them enough to be vulnerable. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a hospital alert. I checked the screen, anxiety immediately displacing our moment of intimacy. It's Lily Chen, I said, already rising. Her stats are dropping. Gabriel didn't try to stop me, didn't suggest someone else could handle it. He understood what my patience meant to me, how each child I saved carried a piece of my heart. Instead, he helped me into my coat, pressed a kiss to my forehead. I'll drive you, he said simply. That was another change, his constant, quiet support, never stifling my independence, but always ensuring I didn't have to stand alone unless I chose to. We reached the hospital in record time, Gabriel's sleek car cutting through the night with surgical precision. In the pediatric ICU, we found Lily's parents huddled beside her bed, their faces drawn with the particular exhaustion that comes from watching your child fight for each breath. Dr. Wright, Mrs. Chen cried when she saw me, relief momentarily brightening her tired features. You came. Of course I did, I said, already scanning the monitors, noting the dangerous dip in Lily's oxygen levels. Lily's my special girl. Gabriel hung back, giving me space to work as I examined the 7-month-old whose life I'd saved twice already. Her tiny body seemed even smaller against the hospital sheets, her skin tinged with the bluish hue that signaled her heart was struggling once again. After a thorough assessment, I turned to her parents with the gravity the situation demanded. The final repair we did last month is failing, I explained gently. Her body is rejecting the graft. Mrs. Chen collapsed against her husband, a keening sound escaping her throat. But you said it was her best chance. You said, and it was, I assured her, maintaining eye contact despite the guilt washing through me. Lily has survived longer than any child with her condition should have. She's a fighter. What can we do? Mr. Chen asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. There must be something. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. There's an experimental procedure. It's never been attempted on a child as young as Lily, and the risks are considerable. But if it works, I took a breath. If it works, it could give her a normal lifespan. Hope flickered across their expressions, fragile but desperate. What is it? Mrs. Chen asked. A bioengineered heart valve, seeded with Lily's own stem cells, I explained. My research team has been developing the technique, but we're still in the animal testing phase. We're at least 6 months from human trials. But Lily doesn't have 6 months, Mr. Chen said, understanding immediately. I nodded, the weight of what I was proposing settling heavily between us. I can't officially recommend this procedure. The hospital ethics committee would never approve it at this stage. If something went wrong, I could lose my license, and you could lose precious time with Lily. Mrs. Chen straightened, maternal determination hardening her delicate features. But you think it could save her? I think it's her only chance, I admitted. But you need to understand the risks. As I outlined the procedure, the potential complications, and the uncertain outcomes, I felt Gabriel's presence behind me. Solid, supportive, but also concerned. This was exactly the kind of medical risk-taking that had both drawn him to me professionally and worried him personally, especially now that I was carrying our child. When I finished explaining, the Chens exchanged a long look. Years of shared struggle and love compressed into a single glance. Do it, Mr. Chen said finally. Save our daughter, Dr. Wright. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation, surgical innovation, and prayer. The latter coming from the Chens, who maintained a vigil outside the operating room while I worked to save their daughter using techniques that existed only in theory and limited lab tests. Gabriel stayed nearby throughout, ensuring I ate and rested when possible, running interference with the hospital administration, and providing the specialized equipment my team needed without questions or bureaucratic delays. When doubts crept in during the darkest hours of the night, his steady presence reminded me why I'd become a surgeon in the first place: to heal the hopeless, to fight death with every skill at my disposal. On the 3rd day, as I carefully implanted the bioengineered valve into Lily's tiny heart, I felt our daughter kick forcefully, as if offering her own encouragement. The sensation centered me, reminding me that life was persistent, resilient, determined to continue against all odds. Close her up, I finally instructed my surgical team, exhaustion making my voice rough. And let's see if this miracle takes. Hours later, as dawn broke over the hospital, Lily's stats began to stabilize. By midday, her color had improved, and by evening, she was breathing without assistance for the first time in weeks. The experimental valve was functioning perfectly, her body accepting the hybrid tissue as its own. When I delivered the news to the Chens, their grateful tears and crushing embrace broke something loose inside me, a dam of emotion I'd held back throughout the ordeal. I found myself crying with them, professional distance forgotten in the pure joy of having saved a life that medicine had declared unsalvageable. Gabriel found me later in the observation room, watching Lily sleep through the glass. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me, his chest warm against my back, his hands coming to rest protectively over our child. "You did it," he murmured against my hair. "You rewrote the rules of what's possible." I leaned into his strength, too exhausted to maintain my usual independence. "We don't know if it will last." "It will." His certainty was unshakable because you refused to accept failure as an option. I turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim light. The pride I saw there was unmarred by jealousy or competition. He genuinely celebrated my success, my skill, my determination. "The hospital board wants to meet tomorrow," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Word of Lily's procedure has reached them. Fear shot through me. They could revoke my privileges. Or worse. Gabriel's smile was wolf-like, predatory. "They won't." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I own controlling interest in this hospital," he reminded me. "And because the medical advancement you've pioneered will revolutionize pediatric cardiac care. They'd be fools to censure you rather than support you." He was right. The next day, instead of the reprimand I'd feared, the board voted unanimously to fast-track my research for FDA approval. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from medical journals, research institutions, and even the Surgeon General's office. By week's end, what I'd done for Lily Chen had transformed from a desperate gamble into a medical breakthrough, my name attached to an innovation that would save countless children worldwide. Gabriel watched it all with quiet satisfaction, never once suggesting that his influence had paved the way for my recognition. Instead, he ensured I had space to absorb my changing status in the medical community, to adjust to being sought after rather than overlooked. "How does it feel?" he asked one night as we lay in bed, his hand tracing patterns on my ever-expanding belly. "To be acknowledged for exactly who you are?" I considered the question, searching for the right words. "Validating," I said finally. "But also strange. I've spent so long fighting to be seen that I'm not entirely sure what to do now that people are actually looking." Gabriel propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious in the moonlight filtering through the windows. "You continue being exactly who you've always been. Brilliant, compassionate, stubborn." His lips curved in a smile, possibly the most remarkable Omega, the most remarkable person I've ever known. The simple sincerity in his voice undid me. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully believe that what existed between us wasn't just biology or circumstance or mutual advantage, but something deeper and more enduring. "I love you," I whispered, the words emerging before I could consider their implications. "I think I have since that first day in the hospital corridor, when you saw me, really saw me, instead of just looking past." Gabriel went very still, his gray eyes darkening with emotion. Then he gathered me against him, his kiss fierce and tender all at once. "I've been waiting to hear those words," he murmured against my lips. Afraid to say them first, afraid of scaring you away. A laugh bubbled up, unexpected and free. "You? Afraid?" His smile was rueful, terrified. "You're the only person who's ever had the power to truly hurt me, Ellie. Because you're the only one I've ever loved like this." He reached into the bedside drawer, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened it to reveal a ring, not the ostentatious diamond I might have expected from someone of his wealth and status, but an elegant band of platinum inlaid with forget-me-nots preserved in clear resin, the same flower my mother had left me in the silver locket I still wore. "How did you know?" I asked, tears blurring my vision. "I pay attention to what matters to you," he said simply. "The locket, the way you touch it when you're nervous or thinking of your mother. I wanted her to be part of this somehow." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me more deeply than any grand romantic declaration could have. This was Gabriel, observant, intentional, unwilling to leave anything he valued to chance. "Marry me, Ellie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of the baby, not because of biology, but because we're stronger together than we ever could be apart." 2 years ago, I would have seen such an offer as a trap, a surrender of the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. But the months with Gabriel had taught me that true partnership didn't diminish individual strength, it magnified it. "Yes," I said, the single syllable carrying the weight of transformation, of walls finally, fully dismantled. We married 3 weeks later in a private ceremony on the rooftop garden of Gabriel's, our penthouse. Lily Chen, now thriving and pink-cheeked, was our flower girl, scattering petals from her wheelchair as her beaming parents looked on. My heavily pregnant form was draped in silk the color of forget-me-nots. My mother's locket nestled at my throat. Gabriel, resplendent in a charcoal suit that emphasized the silver in his eyes, couldn't take his gaze off me as I walked toward him, unescorted. Not because there was no one to give me away, but because I had chosen to give myself. As we exchanged vows beneath a bower of white roses, our daughter kicked so forcefully that Gabriel felt it when he placed his hand on my belly for the ring exchange. A laugh rippled through the small gathering of friends and colleagues who had earned the right to witness this most private moment. "Impatient," Gabriel murmured, his eyes crinkling with amusement, like her mother. "Strong-willed," I countered, smiling up at him. "Like her father." Later, as the celebration continued around us, Gabriel led me to the edge of the rooftop, where the city sprawled below, its lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. "Happy?" he asked, his arm secure around my waist. I leaned into him, considering the question with the thoroughness it deserved. Happiness had always seemed like a luxury for other people, a distraction from the serious business of proving myself, of surviving in a world that wasn't designed for someone like me. But now, with Gabriel's steady presence beside me, with our daughter growing beneath my heart, with my work finally recognized and valued, I realized that happiness wasn't an indulgence, but a foundation, solid ground, from which to reach even greater heights. "Yes," I said, the words simple but profound. "Completely." Gabriel's smile was soft in the fading light, his usual sharp edges mellowed by contentment. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted, his hand gentle on my abdomen. "A mate who challenges me, a child born of love rather than duty. A legacy that matters." I turned to face him fully, placing my palms against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. "We fought for this," I reminded him. "Both of us. Against expectations and assumptions and our own fears. And we won," he said, his voice deepening with satisfaction, with alpha pride tempered by genuine partnership. As if in agreement, our daughter kicked again, a strong, decisive movement that made us both laugh. In that moment, with the city spread below us and the future opening before us, I understood that what we'd found wasn't just love or passion or compatibility, but something rarer still. Recognition of equal spirits, differently wounded but equally strong, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. Gabriel's arms tightened around me as the first stars appeared above, his cheek resting against my hair. "My brilliant, stubborn Omega," he murmured, the possessive words now a comfort rather than a constraint. "My compassionate, protective Alpha," I returned, embracing the bond that had once seemed like the ultimate surrender, but now felt like the greatest freedom I'd ever known. Behind us, the celebration continued, music and laughter floating on the evening breeze. Before us stretched a future we would write together, neither of us diminished by the other's strength. And within me, our daughter grew stronger each day, inheriting not just our genetic material, but the resilience forged by our separate journeys and shared destination. I touched the forget-me-nots in my ring, thinking of my mother and her final advice. "Keep your head down, Ellie. The world isn't kind to Omegas who draw attention." She'd been right about the world's unkindness. But she couldn't have imagined this, that in raising my head, in refusing to be overlooked, I would find not just professional success, but a love that saw me completely, valued me entirely, and cherished me exactly as I was. Gabriel's lips found mine as darkness fell completely, the kiss a promise and a celebration. When we parted, his eyes reflected the city lights and something more. A future neither of us could have imagined alone, but that we would build together, one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time.